The federal government has announced it has torn up 4 agreements between Victoria's government and foreign nations, including the controversial Belt and Road Initiative deal with China. It's the first time the government has used new powers which allow it to cancel agreements that state and territory governments, local councils and public universities strike with other countries. For more, we're joined by Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jegetz at Parliament House. Stephen, take us through what's happened.
Well, this is quite an important announcement that the federal government has made today. Of course, it was last year that it managed to push through the House contentious new legislation, which gave it wide-ranging new powers to essentially cancel any agreement that was struck between state governments, between public universities, between local councils and foreign nations. That is, if the federal government reached the conclusion that they were contrary to the national interest. So this represented a pretty big shift in the way that Australian governments Australian governments were extending their constitutional powers. Now, the speculation around Canberra has been for a while that this is all about one thing, and that is the Victorian government's Belt and Road Agreement with China. And there's been pretty feverish speculation for a few months now that it would soon get the chop. And now that's what's happened. The federal government has announced that it's scrapping 4 deals, but 2 of them are essentially the agreements that provide the framework for that Belt and Road MOU between Victoria and the government of China. The other 2 agreements are more minor agreements. One is with the government of Syria and a Victorian government agency, and the other is with the government of Iran and a government agency in Victoria. But really, those agreements are not not by the looks of it, very substantial ones. If you were cynical, you might even say they were a bit of a fig leaf for the fact that the government has just taken the move of scrapping an MOU with the Chinese government in Victoria. And look, that's almost certain to stoke tensions with Beijing. After a few weeks of relative calm, Beijing has previously warned that it doesn't want Australia to infect the relationship with its bias when asked about the prospect of this agreement being scrapped. Now the government has made that decision. You'd have to say it's inevitable that there'll be an angry response.
Yeah, so what reaction can we expect from this, from Victoria's government as well as from China?
Well, interestingly, it's been a pretty bland statement, really, from Victoria's government so far, just really noting the fact that this has occurred. The first indication out of that statement is that Victoria doesn't seem keen on picking a fight on this. That's interesting given the fact that Dan Andrews was pretty voluble about this last year, saying that he was focused on using the BRI to drive investment and jobs in his state. Other ministers in Victoria accused the federal government of vilifying China. So we'll have to wait and see if that line becomes a little tougher from the Victorian government over the next day or so, or whether they simply have decided to quit the field and let the federal government make these decisions without making any fuss. The more consequential response, of course, will be from Beijing, which, as we know, has taken several opportunities to punish Australia for transgressions, both real and imagined. Given the furious response out of Beijing to the suggestion that this might be scrapped, you'd have to imagine that the decision to actually push ahead and do it is going to inflame things further, and there will inevitably be an angry response from Beijing. Also, Karina, worth remembering that when Beijing actually put its now notorious list of 14 complaints to the federal government, its moves to scrap the BRI MOU was on that list. So it's safe to say that while the Australian government will no doubt argue that it's acting in its own national interest and making sovereign decisions, Beijing will inevitably see this as a slight.
Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jegetz with the details there from Canberra.